Okay. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the meeting of the Georges River Local Planning Panel for the 12th of December 2019. We are the panel who have been appointed by the Council to determine specific development applications, including the development applications that are on the agenda today, in accordance with the requirements of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. My name is Paul Vagotis and I'll be the chairperson for today's meeting. And with me today, I've got Mr. Michael Levy, one of our experts. It's Helen Deegan, one of our experts. And to my far left is Mr. Cameron Jones, who is our community representative. I'm required to advise you that under the provisions of the Environmental Planning Assessment Act, this panel meeting is being live streamed and will be made available on the Council's website for viewing. Everyone must ensure that they speak into the microphone clearly. So when we call you up, can you please make sure that you do speak clearly into that mic? When speaking at our meeting, can you please be respectful and don't use defamatory or discriminatory language? Any part of the meeting that is held in the closed session will not be recorded. The panel have today looked at the completed assessment reports from the council staff, and we've also undertaken inspections of all 4 properties. We'll deal with the 4 applications in order of the agenda, which is 5 to 11A Wyuna Street, Beverly Park, 71 to 73 Jubilee Avenue, Carleton, 89 to 91 Railway Parade, Mortdale, and then lastly 38 Hillcrest Avenue, Hurstville. As required by the local planning panel code of conduct, panel members are required to disclose any conflicts of interest in respect to any matter on the agenda today. The relevant forms prescribed by the Department of Planning have all been completed and are tabled for scrutiny, and they'll also be available on the Council's website. I have them here, so any person from the public can please look at those at your leisure. There's been one panel member that's declared an interest, and that's Helen Deegan, in relation to one of the matters concerning 71 to 73 Jubilee Avenue, Carleton. Helen will not, she didn't take any active role in the site inspection, and she won't take any part in the deliberations or the determination of that matter. As we progress through the matters on the agenda, only those persons that have been registered to speak will be permitted to address the panel. Each person will be provided with a 3-minute window to address the panel, but if you need a little bit more time, as the chair, I can grant that. In each item, we'll hear from the objectors first and then from the applicant. I would ask those persons that are seeking to address the panel to come forward and sit in the chairs in front of us and speak, as I said, clearly into the microphone. Once the panel have heard all the various speakers who have been registered to speak for a particular application, we'll be ready to move to the next matter on the agenda. Please remain seated as well, because the panel is likely to ask you questions. So once we've heard from all the people registered to speak on each of the applications, the meeting will then be adjourned, and we'll go into the closed session for the panel to deliberate and make determinations. All of those decisions will be published on the Council's website. So we'll now move to the first item, which is on our agenda, which is the residential flat building for the Wyuna Street, Beverly Park property. So registered to speak, we have John Totterdell. Please come forward, sir. That's all yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is John Totterdell of 4 Wyuna Street, Beverly Park, and I wish to object to the DA for the following reasons. This development is totally out of character and is wrong for this area. It will have a massive impact on the residents on the eastern side of Wyuna Street, who will eventually be facing a wall of high-rise building blocks from Lacey Street to Stubb Street. It is not environmentally friendly. It will have an adverse impact on the amenities of the area. The original 2015 public exhibit plans associated with amendments to the Crocker City Council LPP 2012 did not show the western side of Wyuna Street to be zoned R3. And it was not until the exhibition period and the submissions had closed that this area was changed to R3. However, at a special meeting in April 2016, the heights of the buildings on the western side of Wynne Street were reduced to 9 metres with a setback depth of 12 metres, and this was formalised in August 2016. The amendments were gazetted in 2017, and the April 2016 changes were disregarded, and the rezoning reverted to the Council Officer report of 2015, which allowed the height of 21 metres. However, the report also stated or recommended specific design and height requirements to provide an appropriate transition to the R2 zone on the opposite side of Wynne and John Streets, and retained a 2-storey setback as part of the preparation of a DCP, part of the DCP controls for the Carleton precinct. Also, Marcus Ray, Deputy Secretary of the Planning Services, New South Wales Government, stated in a letter to Georges River Council in May 2017 that Council should prioritise amendments to the current DCP. This has not been done. Each DA in Wynne Street has not allowed off-street sites for electrical substations, although the existing electrical system will not be able to supply the electrical load required. This can only mean that substations will be sited on the footpath, which is not the policy of Energy Australia or Council. The proposed DAs will require several substations in and around Wynne Street and John Street area. The on-site area needed for these substations, which is approximately 20 square metres, will reduce the open space allocated for each development. The traffic report addresses only the vehicle movements of 5 to 11A Wynne Street and does not take into consideration additional DAs pending. The number of car spaces for this DA is 122. However, 2 additional DAs have 223 car spaces, giving a total of 300 car spaces. All the DAs have their driveways onto Wynne Street, which is only 7.4 metres curb to curb, and the traffic management plans associated with Wynne Street have not allowed for this number of vehicles. This is not sustainable. Also, the walking distance to Carleton Railway Station is over 1 kilometre. Therefore, cars will be the main form of transport. Thank you.
All right, please remain seated and I'll see if there are any questions of the panel. Firstly, you're aware that this panel doesn't make the policy.
I understand that, yeah. But it's it started out as one thing. It wasn't until what actually happened, we had an exhibition and a public exhibition. Yeah. We were all allowed to put in submissions. At that stage, prior to that, the site that we're talking about was only an R2 site. It was not an R3 site. It wasn't until after that exhibition period and the submissions period had closed that it was changed. And this is what brought everybody upset, got everybody upset, because up to that stage, yeah, we were in an R2 zone and they were in an R2 zone.
Okay, I appreciate that. Now, in relation to your property, whereabouts are you there? This is...
Our property's right there.
Okay, good. Just making note of that. All right, thank you. I'll just see if there are any further questions of the panel.
No, that's okay.
Thank you.
I would add just on that the property on the corner, one Wynne Street and 3 Wynne Street, which is those 2 properties there, yeah, are now up for sale, basically. So they're the next cab off the rank. And these properties up here have a DA that's coming up. And we also have the Sunnyside Lacey Street one. So that's why I referred to a wall of high-rise buildings.
Yeah. All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Our next submitter, Colin Shanks, and it's I think it's Alicia. Is it your sorry, councillor? You're speaking on behalf.
Yes, on behalf of Mr. Colin Shanks, who's not well, and he and Mrs. Shanks live at 6Y Una Street, Beverly Park. That's next to the Totterdales. Wyuna Street and John Street run parallel to a national highway. The upzoning proposal dating from 2014 to increase development on these two blocks was gazetted in 2017, but there was no independent traffic modelling undertaken to inform this. That's still the case. This has been confirmed. 47 houses could be developed into more than 500 apartments here, and every proposal and each assessment made of those proposals has relied upon the traffic and parking assessment reports obtained by the applicants. They appear to be a bulk order of almost identical reports, 3 reports by one consultant, 3 by another, yet all 6 are sequentially numbered. This is the only way they can show what's going on. That's the current one, and that's the new one that's still under assessment. This proposal requires 109 car spaces, but there is also a new proposal awaiting assessment at 13 to 21 Wayuna Street, also wanting 109 car spaces. Counting in the proposal that was refused on the corner of this street in September, the one around Sunnyside, and adding the equivalent for the other end block, residents can expect around 220 new dwellings and over 400 cars being proposed for just this one side of the street, a street that is only 7.4 metres wide, that's reduced to a single lane and where passing is carried out between parked cars. And each of the applicants' reports claim each development will create no parking or traffic impact. Trying to gain the maximum development potential of these sites will result in unacceptable environmental impacts. Applying to this area only a set of development standards for high-density zoning, in this case, is not assessing the impacts to this environment. The proposal has insufficient vehicular access, excessive density, and inappropriate building character in this neighbourhood. The 4-storey base is excessive in its impact on the street and surrounding properties. The upzoning was to be controlled by a DCP that imposed a 9-metre high transitional interface with reference to the low-density surroundings. And it's wrong to compare the facade of this building facing Wayuna Street to an Aldi supermarket on the other side of a 6-lane Princes Highway, which is not in our view. With the insufficient setbacks and landscaped areas, this proposal demonstrates an overdevelopment of the site and would set an undesirable precedent for all surrounding future development. Residents are appealing to the panel to apply the balance needed in this assessment and to refuse the current proposal.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll just see if there are any questions to the panel. Clearly, the panel's faced with this, these zoning controls, which permit this type of development, as you're aware. Certainly there are, I'm hearing the concerns about the narrow width of the street being 7.4. That was quite obvious today when we did the other inspection. The panel, as you're aware, dealt with a number of these applications along here. So it seems to be a recurrent theme. Michael, do you have any questions?
No further questions.
No questions. Right. Thank you.
I'm registered to speak for myself as well.
Yes, you may.
Okay, now Alicia Pay, resident of Cogra Bay, and I wish to declare that I was elected to serve Cogra Bay Ward in 2017. I voted to prepare a DCP for this precinct on the 23rd of April and endorsed the draft DCP amendment on the 25th of November. The 2 residential blocks against the Princes Highway and Wayuna and John Streets behind them were upzoned in the LG-wide amendments to the Cogra LEP gazetted in 2017. The upzonings by the previous Cogra Council was originally contingent upon a specific DCP for design and height controls. A draft amendment to the Cogra DCP 2013 was endorsed by this council last month and will go on exhibition from the 20th of January 2020 in just 5 weeks' time. It would nullify the process underway and remove the community's input to instead create a DCP for this large area from this contentious proposal. The proposed development has non-compliances with the Apartment Design Guide's building separations design criteria and fails to meet the standard provisions in the draft amendment to the Cogra DCP 2013. This proposal for 5 to 11A Wayuna Street and its collaborative effect with the development proposal for 13 to 21 Wayuna Street must also take into account the proximity they have to the bordering heritage item, Sunnyside. The amenity of the residents of the proposal and future adjoining buildings require appropriate building setbacks that are sufficient to facilitate landscaping of a significant scale, being responsive to the 6-storey scale of buildings anticipated in the new zone. The inadequate setbacks with limited areas for deep soil planting will also prevent a landscape setting that would be compatible to the pattern of existing and future street setbacks and landscaping in the surrounding area. This low-density zone interface needs to recognise and take into account the form of existing development, and the substantial reductions of the setback and separation provisions are manifestations of the overdevelopment of the site with an unacceptable impact on the street and surrounding properties. The design is not site responsive and fails to address neighbour and neighbourhood amenity. This DA will undermine the urban design goals and preferred design standards for the locality and deserves to be refused. Thank you for allowing me to provide this submission.
Councillor, you providing that to the panel, your submission?
Can if you like.
So we can consider all those matters in detail. Questions of the panel? Lee?
Oh, no, nothing.
Under the draft DCP, what's the height control and the setback that's going to change or differ from what's proposed?
The higher it gets, the further it is set back. So I don't believe that's taken into account with this. And residents haven't had their input either.
Okay.
We would like that to happen.
So
They've waited a long time.
It's a street setback.
The streets, I believe with this development, the street setbacks have been lessened to match the existing dwellings that are going to be demolished, rather than the future setback that's going to be for the whole site, and even future low density on the other side.
So it's basically a setback scenario at the front, street frontage. Okay, thank you.
As well.
Nothing further? Thank you. Thanks very much for your submission. Now, there's one other person registered, but I'm not sure if they've arrived. No, I've just got the name of Adam from 22 Wayuna Street, Beverly Park.
It was too long me on site.
Okay, yes, he's
His name was Adam.
He's not turned up to the meeting. Okay, thank you. Now that concludes the objectors' submissions. Mr. Benjamin Black from Planning Ingenuity. Please come forward, sir. Sorry, sir, and you are Philip Lord. Yes, you're the architect, and Rodney Maroon is he speaking?
He's the client. He won't be here.
Okay, all right. All right, gentlemen, who'd like to go first?
Sure. Thank you to the panel, and thank you to the residents who have come along to express their views. Addressing first, I think it was said by the panel already, but it's this area is earmarked and has undergone significant redevelopment and change in recent years. And that isn't stopping, as the gentleman pointed out. The neighbouring site and the two adjoining it to the highway are proposed as an amalgamated site for sale at the moment, expressions of interest. And that sort of flows along the highway as this upzoning has sleeved the highway since the introduction of the new LEP. So I think it's beyond this application to do anything about the strategic planning environment at this point. In terms of the DCP, there was some discussion there. A draft DCP was a suggested direction to the council from the Department of Planning when they changed the zoning, and that, for whatever reason, has only very recently been underway. I think in the last 6 months, the council's looked to prepare a draft DCP, and that, as was just said by the councillor, is going into submission on the 20th of January. There is an assessment in the council's report on the draft DCP provisions, with specific regard to setbacks. There is a requirement for a 5-metre setback to 4 stories fronting the street, and then an 8-metre setback above the 4th story. Now, we don't strictly comply with that draft DCP, and it wasn't until the report was prepared that we knew of that provision. But even so, we have prepared the design, or put a design forward that tries to respect as far as possible the interaction of this site with the neighbours opposite. In that regard, we have a 4-story form, a strong podium form with the levels above set back and set back some distance. So it's not a tokenistic setback of sorts. It is a proper articulated and modulation of the form. And also the actual, the facade is designed into pavilions to replicate the single dwelling rhythm in the street, to again try and respect what's happening opposite. I think that's very evident in the photo montage that was lodged with the application. It also has a lighter finish to it on the lower floors, and I think that assists the presentation to the street. We've had this application with council now for just on a year, I think it is, and obviously happy with the recommendation for approval. There are 2 minor elements I would like to discuss with the panel. I don't wish to go through, for my sake anyway, the history of the proposal, or indeed details of the proposal. I'm happy to field questions from the panel as may see fit. The 2 elements I'd like to discuss, there's a discussion in the ADG compliance table about, with regard to the number of south-facing units. It says that we have greater than the 15%. That is the guideline in the ADG. It says we have 17% south-facing units. That's at page 36 of the report. In my view, that provision of the ADG talks about not solar access to a balcony or a private open space. It just talks about solar access to a unit. So it can be any part of the unit, whether it be a bathroom window or a living room, obviously is preferred, but it doesn't, there's a clear distinction between solar access requirements, 70% for 2 hours, to private open space and living areas, as opposed to 15% south-facing units, which is just the unit needs to get some sun in the winter solstice between 9 and 3. So in my view, of the listed units there at page 36, it says a total of 11 apartments, and of those, it is my view that AG06, B401 and B501 all received some solar access.
AG06?
AG06, B401,
B40.
B501.
Yeah.
And in my view, that would mean that only 8 units of the 64 proposed would be south-facing, which takes the percentage down to 12.5, and therefore compliant with the ADG. The second point that I wanted to raise with the panel was the reference in the proposed consent conditions to landscape plan revision D. The most recent plan is revision E.
Take us
Condition number.
conditions.
So it is the proposed reference to approved plans.
Yep.
Page
77.
76 and 77. And at the bottom of the table, it indicates their landscape plans, revision D.
Yeah.
My view is that should be revision E, which is the most updated plan with the rooftop open space. We had deleted some aspects of the rooftop, and I think they're the plans we have in front of us.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to raise in the panel. I'm happy to field questions.
All right. Just might hear from Mr. Lord first.
Thanks. Today I'm just happy to give questions.
Okay. All right. I'll see if there are any questions.
Yeah, and look, I'm not sure if you may be able to respond to this, but an issue has been raised about, the future development of the street as a whole and the extent to which individual development applications are looking at traffic generation in the context of the future development. So I guess considering the cumulative impacts, and appreciate you're not the traffic engineer, are you able to respond to how that may have been considered in the traffic assessment?
We would only at this point, understand that it's compliant with the parking requirements of the council. And we would have expected, as a strategic planning exercise, the council would have done its own traffic modelling to ensure that this type of upzoning would have suited those types of issues, amongst other things, open space and what have you. But as much as it isn't within 800 metres of a train station, it's about 1.2 kilometres from the train station, which isn't too far a distance, I don't think, for people to walk and to catch the train. It's a direct route to the city there. And there are lots of bus services.
Would be in the rain, I can assure you.
It might be. I walk fairly quickly though. No, there are bus services as well. Yeah, it's the other thing.
Right. So in terms of the traffic engineer reaching a conclusion that the development's not going to result in adverse traffic impacts on intersections and the like. So that's been looked at in the context of this building rather than necessarily the traffic generation of the street as a whole, because it's assumed that it being considered as part of the upzoning.
That's right. I think it's a correct statement. And when we had lodged these development applications, there weren't any applications lodged surrounding the site that we had to be concerned with. So obviously this report was prepared mid-2018. At that point, this is a standalone site with nothing approved around it. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay,
gentlemen.
Thank you.
Okay, now that concludes that item. A decision will be taken by the panel later today and published on the council's website. Moving to the next item on the agenda, it's the proposal for 7173 Jubilee Avenue, Carleton. As I mentioned earlier, Ms. Helen Deegan has declared an interest and will vacate the chamber. Now, registered to speak as an objector is Suzanne O'Connor. Please come forward, ma'am.
Yes, my name is Suzanne O'Connor. I have lived in the Cogra area for 41 years. I had 3 sons who attended the Carleton South Public School and currently have 2 grandchildren at the school. I am delighted with the council decision to refuse this development consent. And I'd like to make a few remarks to hope to entice you to maintain that position. Now, the most important thing from the children, the school, the mothers, the parents and friends, everybody in the school area, is the privacy of the schoolyard. This building looks over, with all its balconies, onto the playing grounds for the junior school. These are the kindergarten children. It's totally inappropriate. Now, the school is currently at capacity, according to the headmaster with whom I spoke yesterday. To accommodate increased school places for future children of the area, increased enrolments, the school may have to construct a 5-storey building to accommodate those new children in the area. As you know, the area is densifying up magnificently, and the western wall should be blank. If that building were to go ahead, it should be blank, because if they need to build, it will have to be on the eastern side of the school. So, but this is refused, I hope, and it stays refused. Now, I would also argue about rooftop community space. That is still the privacy issue of the children in the playground. The rooftop community space still has access to the viewing of the children playing, and there is a park across the way. Why do they need rooftop gardens on that building? It's an absurdity. Now, this building was supposed to have had shops underneath, so it's a shop top development.
Right.
Now, where on earth would a shop have its parking? It's on the Princess Highway. I will show you some documents here about the current traffic issues in Jubilee Oval, which are profound. The parking for everybody connected to the school is virtually impossible. We have the kiss and go parking, but Jubilee Avenue is practically gridlocked 3 times a day, and it lasts for a very long time. Now, there's a community group who are taking particular notice of people getting into and out of Beverly Park, because it's too complicated, but I have it written down here and I'll hand it to the panel. You cannot turn right onto Princess Highway from Jubilee Avenue. You will go 5 sequences of lights before you get around. So people are crossing over, going around through Beverly Park to get back onto the Princess Highway. It really is. This is a picture that you may wish to look at, which is the traffic backed down towards Rocky Point Road from the Princess Highway. And that's not at a peak time, but it's down past the golf club. Yeah, so it really is a major problem. Adding to the congestion is going to be the hundreds of units in the Darrell Lee site. That is major. There is a letter here addressing those issues. It's too complicated for me to discuss, but there it is about how many right turns are not available, how many left turns are not available, etc. But if you could peruse that in your deliberations, I'd be grateful. I think that's about all I want to say. But to imagine that there could be shops underneath a high-rise building of this dimension on that site is an absurdity. There's no stopping until 10 o'clock. Then it's not quiet, it's quite busy. They cannot park in Jubilee Avenue. And, you know, it's an absurd notion to have shopping and shops selling things. I've no idea how that would work in this location. I live in English Street, which is parallel to Jubilee. I know the area exceedingly well, and I just think, I hope that the panel will maintain the council's decision. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. I'll see if there are any questions.
Sure.
Mr. Jones?
No, I think you've covered everything.
Thank you.
Just wondering if I could just clarify the areas of concern relating to the playground. Perhaps if you could.
Well, this is the junior school here. This is all this area here. You know, they play in the front, they play in the back, and they play there.
Okay, and do you think there's any screening provided by the trees along the boundary?
No, I don't. They're very, you know, miserable little trees, actually. But thank God they're on our side of the thing and they won't be able to cut them down. But that's not a screen for a 5-storey building. They're gums of mediocre quality. That's it.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Now, registered to speak on behalf of the applicant, we have Mr. Stephen Kerr. Now, Mr. Kerr, is Mr. Apostolou and Lucas with you today?
Mr. Apostolou.
Okay.
He's the architect.
Right. Okay, who'd like to go first?
I will, please. Thank you for the opportunity to speak at this panel meeting. The panel would have seen from the report that's before it, there are 4 issues. Fundamentally, there's what I'll call the B6 issue and clause 6.9 of the LPP that prescribes a minimum amount of commercial floor space. There's the issue of the trees, and at this point a difference of opinion between our arborist and the council's arborist regarding the impact of the development on the trees. There is the privacy issue that was just discussed in relation to the school and what I'll call the loading issue. Earlier in the week, the applicant submitted amended plans which address...
They're the ones that we've been handed
If
today?
they were provided to you today.
Yes, they were.
Yeah.
I'll just get you to verify that they're the amended set.
It's missing the basement 3 plan.
Right, okay.
And those amended plans, we believe, address the issues that have been raised in the officer's report. I guess what we're doing is asking the panel to take an amber light approach by deferring the application to allow the officers to properly assess these plans so that they can be reported back to the panel. Having said this, there's two things I'd like to do. One is respond to this concern regarding privacy in the school, because it is quite a common concern that you hear throughout Sydney, where, of course, single dwellings are being replaced by multi-storey residential buildings. And the other thing I want to do is spend a bit of time on this B6 issue and clause 6.9 of the LEP. Privacy for the school, look, I full well understand why not just parents of this school, but any school which is experiencing change around them like this are concerned with multi-storey residential buildings being put up. But it has happened now in numerous places in Sydney, and the concerns regarding privacy simply don't materialise. Schools are occupied for less than 40 weeks of the year, only during weekdays between generally 8:20 and 3:30 in the afternoon. And whilst I wouldn't try and guess what sits behind the concerns regarding privacy, the fact is that from the street and from other places around schools, you can look into schools. In this case, the play areas for the school are located, for the most part, on the opposite side of the school grounds. We're separated by the trees.
To the south as well.
I don't agree, and to the south as well. I don't agree that the trees are mediocre. They're a good row of trees. They deserve to be protected. Separating our building from the playgrounds, the main playgrounds are school buildings. I appreciate in the future the school may build to multi-storey teaching buildings themselves. Certainly there are no plans for that at the moment. The development of our site wouldn't be a constraint to the redevelopment of the school. It just requires sensible planning. The concept of having a blank elevation on the western side of our building simply wouldn't work, as you would appreciate, in trying to design a mixed-use building. Turning to the B6 issue, our site's a relatively small site, as you would have observed when you visited. It's not possible. It has been tried, but it's simply not possible to consolidate it with the adjoining site, and there's nothing that compels the adjoining neighbours to consolidate with our site. There's no minimum site area for the purpose of redevelopment. Yeah. We have a good frontage to two roads, Princess Highway, which is constrained in terms of access, but of course Jubilee Avenue, which provides access. The control in the LEP in clause 6.9 has the objective of providing for the viability of development in the B6 zone, which of course goes to the question, how do we know whether those controls will facilitate viability of the zone? I stand by our clause 4.6 request and the reasons that we provided. I don't believe the officers in their assessment report have done anything to rebut our reasons, apart from put forward what I would call the Monty Python argument clinic rebuttal. But what I'd like to do is just take our 4.6, well, the arguments are the same, but take it a little bit further in terms of detail. What I have here is the study that was done by SGS Economics and Planning for Cogra Council, which informed the Cogra City Plan. It was done in March 2013. The Cogra City Plan, which created this zoning, was gazetted in 2017. I'll refer to this as Council's own modelling, given that Council commissioned this study. Modelling was undertaken of the proposed B6 zone, which stretches between Jubilee Avenue and Plant Street. Yep. That modelling was based on an assumed FSR of 1.5 to 1. It assumed 33% of that 1.5 to 1 would be commercial and 67% residential. And even at those ratios, the highest development margin that was achieved was only 8.1%, making redevelopment of the test site and the enterprise corridor not viable. As the panel would be aware, generally for the purpose of determining viability, you're looking for a development margin, given the risk involved, between 20 and 25%, or in very desperate times, 15%, but certainly nobody would regard 8.1% to be viable. In the SGS model, it was assumed that 67% of the site area would be commercial floor space. In other words, there'd be 1 story of commercial. This was consistent with Strategy 5 in the recommendations of this study. Strategy 5 says, create a B6 enterprise corridor zone on Princes Highway between Jubilee Avenue and Plant Street on the northwestern side of Princes Highway, excluding those excising clusters of residential. This will ensure that bulky goods retail is clustered at a highly accessible location within close proximity to the major centre. It will also reinforce the existing bulky goods and mixed-use business cluster along this strip. Residential uses may be permissible with consent in this zone, but ideally should be set back from the road corridor. The final LEP...
I don't want to cut you off, but that's a report that we haven't been provided with.
I appreciate that, and again, I'm asking the panel to defer.
I know your application is for deferral, and I appreciate that. I've let you go on a bit further than the 3-minute window. Are you nearly finished your submission?
Very nearly done,
Right,
and
yeah.
happy to leave with a copy of the study.
Thank you.
As I said, I'm not introducing anything new in terms of the arguments that we've put forward in our 4.6,
Right.
but simply trying to help the panel understand the strategic context behind this control, which has not been tested on any other site up to this point, but there are a number of applications waiting in the wings. The final LEP, as panel's aware, increased the FSR in the enterprise zone to 2:1. I can't find any published reasons for this, but let's assume it was to make the B6 enterprise corridor economically viable. Let's also assume that the objective was to create ground floor bulky goods and mixed use business uses consistent with Strategy 5 in the study. The additional 0.5 to 1 FSR, therefore, would have been for residential uses. The resulting non-residential proportion would be 27%. Instantly, it's less than the 35% in the LEP. The SGS model, however, was not updated for the 2:1 FSR, so Council didn't know whether even 2:1 would be economically viable. What is clear to me is that the SGS study, which underpins the LEP, didn't contemplate, first of all, commercial premises as a viable scenario. Strict adherence to the 35% non-residential requirement, therefore, will make development of the B6 corridor unviable according to the Council's own study, making achievement of the objectives of the control and the objectives of the zone, which require redevelopment, unable to be achieved. That is essentially the argument in our 4.6. Again, I'm asking for the matter to be deferred. We have amended plans which will completely address all of those issues, including the B6 issue. The applicant, I think, out of desperation, is willing to give commercial uses a go on the first floor. I have my own personal doubts about the success of that, and as a planner, I can't see the justification for it. If the panel is of a mind to defer the application and I'll leave it to the panel to decide how this is possible, able in some way to give some indication on the B6 issue, and whether the panel agrees that they don't support the arguments in our 4.6, that advice at this stage would be really useful, obviously. But as I said, our first objective is to achieve a deferral and to be given the opportunity to address every issue identified by the officers, which we've demonstrated can be done, taking that amber light approach, which, of course, is quite commonly held.
Okay, Mr. Hostelou, do you have any further to add?
No, I think Steve summarised everything that we wanted to discuss. It's more to answer any queries in terms of the amended plans. I'd just like to add that in terms of the approval or the assessment process, should I say, it's been about 18 months. From that time, we were sent a set of what the planner at the time called it the detailed assessment of the application was made in 24th of January. We responded to those by April. From April till October, we received pretty much no correspondence. And then in October, when we received this correspondence, it was pretty much, these are the outstanding issues. Well, they weren't really outstanding. Some of them were new issues, and we won't let you make the amendments. So here we are in front of you with something that's deemed for refusal where I don't think we're given really an opportunity to make any further amendments.
Can I ask, with respect to this submission that we've now got, this letter dated the 9th of December, appreciate that this panel, we're here as a determinative body. We're not here as to accept fresh material in the nature of, well, this, for want of a better reason, is you'll need consent of the council under the regulation to amend your DA. Has this been lodged with the front counter or not?
No, this was an email sent to the planner to pass on to the panel.
Right. Okay. Well, we can't accept it, right? I mean, we're not empowered to accept an amendment to a development application as a body. So you would have to make this application to the council, and then the council will determine whether or not it's prepared to grant consent to the amendment to the DA. I mean, that's the legal position of it.
Well, those plans in that letter, which provides written particulars of the amendments, which satisfies the legal requirements of the applicant, were provided to the council.
Right.
Being
So
an officer of the council.
Yeah,
that's right.
Right. Okay. And that was when?
That was on the.
I thought this was the first time you'd introduced this to the council.
Yes, it was.
To this
I think
council.
it was Monday.
Right. So the council did receive this.
Yes.
Over the counter or whatever the case may be. Or email. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, that's fine. That's your prerogative. You can make that application. The council has to determine whether or not it's prepared to grant consent under the regulation to amend your development application. So on that basis, we'll investigate that matter with the council officers after we adjourn, and we'll go from there, I think. Yeah. But appreciate that this panel doesn't have the power to accept an amended set of plans for the purposes of the regulation to amend your DA.
Yeah.
No panel does.
Look, I fully appreciate that. I would just ask the council to take the approach espoused by now Justice Moore, which is if something can be
is overruled. So the amber light, as much as I used to like it as a lawyer and made those submissions many times, has now been overruled by Justice Preston, who says you can't turn on amber lights. The amber light has been more or less broken. But,
for the determining body, for the assessment body, and we're asking for this to be deferred.
Yeah. I think we understand what your application is for this panel not to make a determination on this matter and to defer it. Now, obviously, that's a matter that we'll consider later on. With respect to these amended plans, I mean, we'll take some guidance from the council officers who have the power or delegation to deal with the acceptance of an amended development application. All right.
Thank you.
I'll just see if there are any further questions.
Yeah, the question I had is, even on the revised plans, how do you propose to address the loading issue?
So there was some correspondence back and forth with council after we received that email back in October asking for the loading bay. It was said that the loading bay at ground level, which we had proposed, was not acceptable because you had to reverse back out. So we got back to them and said, look, getting an MRV into the basement is mission impossible. You just won't work on a site of this size. They came back to us and said, we may accept an SRV, but you'll have to fit it within your basement. And that's what these plans show, is that you can get an SRV into the basement. I do think it could work, but we did have a detailed look at that because the ramp grades are a lot gentler, even for an SRV, and the headroom's 3.5 metres. So we've just managed to make that work. If we try to get an MRV down there, it's 4.5 metre head clearance, next conditional metre, and the ramp grades are even less steep than an SRV requirement.
Can I ask, and I know you mentioned that there was a missing basement plan. You've got a third level of basement?
That's right. So because of the tree protection zone requirements of council wanting 6 metres all the way across there, plus the loading bay in the basement has meant we've had to go down an additional level.
So in relation to the excavated face, the eastern side, I take it you're coming right up to the boundary, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Right, so that abuts the road reserve for the Princess Highway.
Yes.
Is there any engineering detail with respect to any anchors that are required within the road reserve?
Not at the moment, no. Not at that stage. But we have done similar developments to the boundary, and we just work through that with the engineers. We understand that there are issues with the highway and things like that, but there are methods.
Well, yeah, possible. I mean, my question stems from that is, whether or not the RMS need to get involved because it's their road.
They do, but it's generally by conditions.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Mr. Levy, do you have any questions?
Just further to that question about the internal access, have you done some swept paths to see?
At the moment, I just applied the Australian standard. So the Australian standard for a curved ramp has certain dimensions which we've followed there. But in terms of swept paths, no, we haven't gone to that much detail yet. It would need potentially some refinement. But we have done a similar development where we have used the aisle as a sort of a reversing zone to allow for that SRV when it comes down to reverse back that way and then back up the ramp. So I know the ramp complies 100%, but the swept paths through there, I'm not 100% unless we get an engineer on board.
And with the waste collection, both commercial and residential, is that on-street curbside collection?
Correct, yes.
And is there adequate street frontage for that? And given the proximity, given the location of the driveway and the proximity to the intersection, are there potential traffic impact issues in terms of collecting a large number of bins so close to?
To be honest with you, I don't know from which road they would be collecting it from. If they're collecting from Princess Highway, that's obviously your longer frontage through there.
Clearway restrictions?
Yeah, but generally they're picking them up first thing early in the morning, so I don't know if that's so much of an issue. I'm assuming that a lot of the sites along the highway here that are currently retail are doing a similar thing. Worst case, we can get, if we're getting an SRV into the basement, then we can get a private contractor with an SRV 100% down there to collect.
Yeah. Okay, and the final question was just, and I can see with the amended plans how they've been prepared in response to the issues that have been raised and perhaps haven't been sort of fully developed.
Yeah.
But it appears there's been no change to the floor to ceiling heights for level 1 compared to a residential.
No, not at the moment. So we have 3.1 floor to floor.
Yeah.
We have about 400 millimetres spare in terms of height without having a non-compliance. So we can easily achieve the 3.3 metres floor to floor for that first floor. We haven't updated sections and the like.
For that commercial level, yeah.
All right. That's it, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your submission. The decision will be taken by the panel later today and published on the council's website. Okay. Now, we move to the next item, which is 89 to 91 Railway Parade, Mortdale.
Grab.
And we need Ms Deegan to come back. I know, Mr Apostoli, you're involved in this one as well. And Mr Robinson?
So I just can't make it, so I'll just do it myself.
I think he's behind you, isn't he? There he is. So he's materialised. So please come forward. There's no objectors. So gentlemen, you both take a seat. We'll just wait for Ms. Deegan to have a look.
I didn't see it.
Straight behind. Right. Okay, I'll just wait till you're organised.
Sorry.
Okay. Who'd like to start?
Yeah, all right. Just having a bit of time. Good afternoon, panel members, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you on this application this afternoon. I'd just like to address some of the planning issues that are raised in the assessment report. Firstly, the report notes that one of the key planning issues with the redevelopment of this site is its narrow width and generally small site area, which is due to the inability to amalgamate with the adjoining site at number 93.
Yeah.
And while we appreciate that a better urban outcome may be realised through inclusion of number 93, we believe that in accordance with the established planning principle, reasonable attempts to try and purchase that site have been made.
Caravellis principle?
That's correct.
Yep.
Yes, and these have proved to be unsuccessful. I think Jim was going to give you some further details on that in a minute when he speaks.
I think we'd be interested in hearing that because we did have the opportunity to talk to the neighbour next door who believed that there wasn't adequate representations made, but of course that's only a one-dimensional comment, so it's always good to hear your side of the story. But Mr. Robinson, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
So what was lodged with the initial DA was 3 letters of offer. So it was the first letter at 3.9,
Right.
second letter at 4, and third letter at 4.05. And that was based on an evaluation made of market value of.
And did that go to the gentleman's home address? Because apparently he doesn't live next door to your development site.
We tried to get his home address, but it was never given to us. So all we could do was send it to the Mortal address.
Right.
And
Okay.
that was sent by registered post.
Okay.
And sorry, you were saying, and that's based on evaluation?
Correct, yes.
By a valuer?
By a valuer, yes. And then further to that, there was a change of ownership of the property, subject site. There was an updated valuation made.
Yeah.
Which came in at, and this is only recent, sorry, so this one came in at $100,000 more, at 2.9 million. On the 29th of August, the new owner's lawyer, again by post, sent a new letter of offer to the owner at the request of council, which came in at 3.4 million, which again is over the valuation's 2.9 million. There was verbal discussions made with the owner. I don't know the exact outcome of that, but I'm quite sure that, actually I do know that he did not accept that offer. So there's been lots of opportunities, and he could have approached us, or the owner as well.
Well, the onus actually is the other way around in terms of you having the development.
Yeah, so the initial point of contact was from us, but generally if you're interested in selling, you make a call or something or speak to the agent. I don't know what happened, to be honest with you. But in
Can I
terms of,
just confirm your context then in terms of the original application? Because there was, the change of ownership occurred during the development application process. Your role in that?
Were you the architect for the previous owner?
yes.
Right. Right.
Okay, so it's novated across.
That's
Same for yourself, you're both the architect
Yes.
planner,
Yes.
have trends come across.
Correct.
Okay, right.
So you came as a package deal.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. All right.
So that's
That explains that.
history, yeah.
All right. Thank you.
The new owner is here, so if you have any questions about the exact communication, he can perhaps clarify for you.
And have those letters been provided to the council?
Everything has been provided, yes.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Robinson.
Thank you. So just going on, neither the LEP or the DCP contain any controls with respect to preferred or indicative amalgamation pattern or a minimum frontage or site area. And in its latest consideration of the proposal in April this year, The design review panel acknowledged that efforts to acquire the adjoining site had been made but were unsuccessful, and on that basis, subject to recommendations for some minor design amendments, supported the proposed development. These recommended design amendments have not been made. However, I understand from Jim that these could readily be made to the scheme. They were, I think, involved a change to some of the landscaping within the deep soil area at the rear, a change to the setback of one of the units to improve solar access, and I think some changes to the main pedestrian entrance at street level to try and widen that.
Yes, but okay, go.
So just going on, concerns also raised in the assessment report that the 97 square metre commercial tenancy only represents 6% of the overall GFA and therefore is tokenistic and doesn't show a commitment to satisfying the B2 zoning objective, which seeks to encourage commercial, employment and business generating uses. I disagree with this view, firstly noting that there is no LPP or DCP requirement for this site or the B2 zone to provide a minimum non-residential component of the overall GA for shop top housing developments. And I would argue that 97 square metre tenancy would provide a viable lettable area for a range of business, office or retail premises, and that the lack of a loading bay that's also raised in the report doesn't necessarily undermine the functionality or serviceability of the tenancy, such that it severely limits the viability of the tenancy to support a commercial use that would serve the needs of the local community and add to the economic prosperity and diversity of the expanded Mortdale Commercial Centre, which is what they were trying to achieve with this rezoning. Another concern that's raised is that the proposed development will set an undesirable precedent and is inconsistent with the desired future character that's been established by the adjoining shop top housing developments that have been approved at numbers 85 and 87 Railway Parade, directly to one side, and at 1 Ellen Subway, which is to the rear, and I imagine that the panel would have had a look at both of those properties this afternoon. However, these are two large sites and they are not characteristic of the existing subdivision pattern of the properties between our site at 89 and running down to 101 Railway Parade. These sites have much narrower frontages and therefore the opportunity to create larger amalgamated development sites would be more difficult. And the fact that these two approved developments have occurred on the larger sites would seem to indicate that the relative ease to achieving a development site compared to the need to amalgamate 3 or more properties on the narrower allotments in order to realise the frontage width is seen as the desired character. So I think it's suggested that the 30 metre frontage is what's setting a desirable precedent. And in this regard, despite the current inability to amalgamate with 93, there still remains potential for 93 to be redeveloped in a similar fashion, either with or without number 95, and this would still leave numbers 97, 99 and 101 with the potential to be redeveloped as an amalgamated site. So just in conclusion, in the absence of an indicative amalgamation pattern, the required minimum frontage or a site area, and on the basis that we believe reasonable attempts to include number 93 in the development site have been made, it would seem reasonable that, subject to the inclusion of the design review panel's recommended modifications, an acceptable reform outcome could be achieved on the site.
Mr. Postleworth, do you have anything further?
No, I think that pretty much summarises everything from that I'd say as well. The additional thing I want to raise is that, in terms of the proposal not being consistent with future character, it specifically, the report specifically says on point 24 that the development will sit forward of the approved development at 85 to 87 Railway Parade. We have a 3 metre setback to the upper residential floors, and from what I can see from the proposed or the approved drawings for 85 to 87, they also have a 3 metre setback. So I'm not quite sure whether I've misunderstood something there or whether council considered something else there. Also, they refer back to the Part D of the DCP in terms of development in business B1 and B2 zones, where it talks about setbacks for development in this area. the DCP was based on essentially two-storey development, so it's completely outdated in terms of the new LPP. But it says that side setbacks are generally not permitted in order to maintain the continuity of active frontages unless specified in the locality controls. I had a look at the locality controls, and there's nothing about setbacks. It's saying something about height and density. So going back to what Andrew was saying, the desired future character and what's been set by the neighbouring approved developments, you have 85 to 87 and the development on Ellen Subway. Ellen Subway is very much a unique site. It's triangular, so it's very much a building and around where it does need to have setbacks on all sides. And then you have 85 to 87, which starts to inform the development of Railway Parade. Essentially, it's kind of like an L-shaped building. I don't understand why they stopped short by 3 metres to our property, because that does, I agree, it does provide a bit of an odd break between the buildings. You know, you either have sort of 6 metres or you have nothing, but to have 3 metres, I think, is an odd break. And it's a B2 zone, so I don't understand why you need setbacks for the height that's in this area. We recently had something approved at 324 to 330 Railway Parade in Carleton, B2 zone. I have the drawings here if you want to have a look, where it was approved, and it was boundary to boundary, not only at the front but also at the back. So I don't understand why council thinks that this is out of character for a B2 zone. Yeah, that's what I'd like to raise.
All right. The only question I've got in relation to the loading bay or lack thereof, don't you limit the types of commercial premises that can go in there? I mean, obviously offices and commercial practices, professional practices might work, but I mean, what about a shop?
Well, that's right. I mean, I'd agree with that, and I think, but that's the point that I was trying to make, was that there are still a range of viable businesses that wouldn't necessarily need a loading dock to operate successfully. So I just felt that
it just narrows the scope.
It narrows the scope, certainly, but you know, you look at the types of services that are available. There's still a wide range that wouldn't require any loading or unloading requirements.
All right. Okay. Any questions?
Yes. Look, part of observation and part question. This land and this commercial zone is a little bit unique, particularly compared to some of those town centre areas, in that it is immediately across the road from low density residential, and so it does form part of a transition. Was the question of building separation and the presentation to the street adopting the approach that's being proposed, in that the approved development to the side has I think a 3-storey podium, and that sets back, but also from the side boundary as well. Whereas this from the street is pretty well built side to side, and it also relies on the adjoining property doing likewise, which sort of creates that larger urban mass, less separation between buildings, and just the appropriateness of that approach in a commercial area that's a little bit more removed out of a main centre and surrounded by other commercial land. If you could just respond to that in terms of the separation between buildings and the character that creates in relation to the transition to a residential area.
And you made that comment with respect to the context of the one at Railway Parade in Carleton. That's different, isn't it?
That's opposite the railway station, so yes, it is a bit of a different, I guess, built environment than what it is here in Mortail. And I understand this is not the main centre of Mortail, that's across the railway line. But we're not talking about a 10-storey building here, it's only 6 stories. So to provide a 3-metre setback or something to the side, I don't know if that's really going to reduce the, I guess, any amenity or increase the amenity to the neighbours on on the other side of Railway Parade. It's only a short strip as well. You've got a mixed two-storey development here that is not that old, and I think it has 6 or 7 units with retail below, so I don't know if that will ever get developed. So in terms of, I guess, street wall, it's not like you've got an enormous length of street where you're going to, have an uninterrupted length of buildings. So, yeah, and I guess at the end of the day, it's a narrow site. We've made all attempts to purchase next door. I understand it would be a better development, totally agree. But at the end of the day, if the neighbour's not coming to the party, then, it needs to be developed at some point in time. And what do you do with that? At 16 metres, if you start finding setbacks of 3 or 6 and 5 ADG, then what do you have left? I think, sorry, just one more thing. As part of the response from the DRP when we had our initial pre-DA meeting with them, it was they had some major concerns about us going boundary to boundary at the back. So we actually pulled away some of the massing from the back and put it at the front. So, we're getting pushed and pulled from all ends here.
And with that question of isolation and understanding the principle adopted by the court, which establishes a test to go through to be able to sort of demonstrate whether or not a site can reasonably be consolidated with an adjoining property, is a process to be gone through, but that doesn't, that's really the first step, I guess, to allow the consideration of that property in isolation of another property. What it can also result in is, a narrow, constrained site, which may not actually be able to achieve some of the density and development potential that a large site could. So this approach seems to be saying, well, look, we can't consolidate, but we're going to get everything and push to the limits as if we were a larger site, rather than recognising that perhaps there are some constraints to this site in light of the fact you're saying you can't consolidate with the adjoining property, in terms of perhaps pulling it in a bit and perhaps a little bit less yield, which reflects the narrow width and constrained nature of the site.
Well, as part of, after we had the pre-DA meeting, we had a look to see what can occur on the neighbouring site. So we've taken into consideration ADG compliance for not only our site but also the neighbouring site. So in terms of just going for the maximum, we kind of worked backwards and made sure that we comply in terms of amenity for not only our site but also the neighbouring site. And that's why we've pulled in so much at the back, and even the DRP as part of the DA process said, well, why don't you take it down an additional level so that you only have 2 stories above the podium, and then that you allow enough sunlight into your breaks within your building. So, and we are under the FSR as well, so it's not like we've maximised that either.
I'd be keen to see some turning circles in the car parking. Wondered whether you had any reports that might show us car circulation, turning circles. Noticed that the traffic report that was attached to the documentation didn't have anything.
That's okay. I don't have them at hand.
Yeah, obviously, so therefore you feel confident that swept paths, turning circles, manoeuvrability.
We have all our minimum mile widths, and some of them for the single lane is a little bit greater than what's required. And in terms of turning circle from the aisle to the ramp, there's a fair bit of distance between the two, so I don't see any issue with the car turning.
You don't have any plans that show those circles?
No.
And it wasn't included on the traffic report, was it?
No.
Any reason for that?
Typically, well, I don't know, it just depends on the engineer that we use, but sometimes that they just don't include them in.
I just would have thought, particularly on a very tight site like this, demonstrating circulation within car parking probably would be
It's
something.
actually quite an efficient layout. So I know it's tight, because of the depth of the site, it does allow for double-loaded aisles and whatnot. So it's not like we've had to really, squeeze in the spaces to make it work.
Jones?
I think, Council, maybe, I could be mistaken, but I thought the ground floor of the 83 to 85 was set back 3 metres as well. Is that something that you would consider on your ground floor? Is that possible to do?
If that's what they're meaning, then yes, happy to consider that.
Okay, and the other thing was I don't know whether the owners are here, but
Current owner is, yes.
the neighbour on site at 93 we saw on site today and was fairly adamant that there is here. Yeah. Yeah, well, our understanding is that he's keen to sell. I mean, I'd be just interested to know that.
Exhausted that.
Yeah, has that been totally exhausted at this stage? Because it strikes me that there would be, and I mean, it's not us to say you must buy next door, but it would be such a better outcome if you could combine those sites and distribute the floor space a little better and maybe get some relief on that street front. It just strikes me that it would be a better outcome for everyone. You'd probably get better money for the units, you'd probably get a better outcome, better apartments, better shop, double aisle car parking. It just strikes me that it would be a superior outcome if you were able to maybe get together with a neighbour and come to an agreement in relation to that.
Might also result in a better recommendation for us.
Yes, I totally agree. From my understanding and what I've been told, because I wasn't party to any of these discussions, is that they have been exhausted. The current owner is here. You can perhaps ask him the question, but the communication back to me was the letter was sent and no response was provided.
What I'm going to do is I'll stand you down for 10, 15 minutes and we'll move on to the next matter. Are you able to talk to these gentlemen?
I can. I'm a joint owner with my sister. I can discuss it. My big concern is there's three offers that suggest that.
All right. Well, that's a private matter that you need to discuss. Would you want that opportunity to talk for 10 minutes or not?
Well, I've got another appointment. I need to go. So if
Well, you said the current owner's responsibility.
That's
Well,
right.
I'd suggest it's the current owner's responsibility anyway.
If you have
Yeah.
to talk.
All right. Okay. Well, if that's your position with respect to this DA, then thank you for your submissions, and we'll consider what you've said, and the determination will be made later today and published on the council's website. Thank you. Thanks very much. I do encourage you to take the opportunity to talk to the owner. Okay. Thank you. All right. That concludes that matter. Moving to the last item on our agenda, which is the secondary dwelling application for 38 Hillcrest Avenue, Hurstville. We have one person registered to speak, which is Radhika Sharma, on behalf of the applicant. Please come forward.
Oh, thank you. I apologise for my coughing.
Floor's yours, man.
Hi, my name is Radhika. I'm acting on behalf of Master Planners as an applicant of this.
Sorry, just press the button.
Push that.
Application, is that on?
That's
Thank
it.
you.
Let go of it. It's fine.
Okay, all right. I'm representing my client, the owner of the property, to ensure council has carefully considered the value of the secondary dwelling on this lot as a necessity. The client has a family who have a need to live in the secondary dwelling as they do not have the means to live elsewhere. My client has invested a significant amount of time and money to submit this development application and the subsequent review with supporting documentation, including an assessment prepared by a level 5 qualified arborist. We've taken into consideration the trees on the site, and the consulting arborist has provided a supporting assessment stating that the trees can be retained, transplanted and replaced as demonstrated on the proposal. Specifically, I draw your attention to point 11.3 of the arborist assessment prepared by Jim McArdle. Tree 3, the Phoenix Palm, establishes well as a transplant and would provide a featured entrance to the construction area without reducing canopy. The trees which have been nominated for removal have been determined to be of low to moderate value and are not of good structure and have not achieved a mature state. Our client is currently willing to plant additional Indigenous species, such as weeping bottlebrush, as compensation for removal in order to support the development without altering the location of the secondary dwelling. This development is not a major development, which will have a significant impact on council's infrastructure or amenity to neighbouring properties, and has had no significant objections to our knowledge. Based on the site conditions and constraints which we have addressed, there is no possible alternative outcome for the secondary dwelling location which our client can afford. The current location of the proposal suits the existing topography of the lot and achieves compliance with the relevant regulations and codes as much as possible. Any non-compliances have been addressed and are not major when taking into consideration precedent secondary dwellings which have been approved through Georges River Council. We ask this panel to take into consideration the points which I have made, as our client has invested a lot of energy and time in pursuit of a reasonable outcome.
Okay, that's your submission?
Yep.
All right, please remain seated. Some questions that we may want to ask you. In relation to the overall cost of this development, it's proposed that it's going to cost $185,000. Is that the cost involving the relocation of the 2 phoenix palm trees?
At the moment, that is a cost of constructing the secondary dwelling. That's the amount of work that we have been enlisted to carry out for the applicant, the owner.
So that's the build cost?
That's the build
cost.
cost.
Secondary dwelling?
That's right, that's right.
So that would include no landscaping?
So that's no landscaping, that's not the excavation involved to remove 2 very, very mature phoenix palm?
Not at the moment, so we need
Has
to...
your arborist costed that out for you?
No, so...
Do you realise the size of those trees?
I do. I realise the size of those trees. What we need to do is work out the outcome before we can negotiate with our client the price for doing those works, the tree removal works, as council deems necessary. So we can't really quote it as part of our contract that we have been enlisted to carry out without knowing exactly, which trees can we remove, which can be transplanted, how many trees will be planted as replacement. Those things.
All right, but your proposal is for the transportation or transplanting of the tree, or
That's
2
right.
trees.
It's part of the development application, but our client has the option of also seeking other people to carry out those works.
Okay, but from what I understood from your submission is that your clients are on a budget.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Things are a bit tight in terms of their expenditure. Those trees would have root balls which would be rather big, and I would have thought in the range of about 10 tonne. And where they're located up on the high side of the site, logistically, that would require craning those trees, digging and then craning out, and also affecting the neighbouring property to the north. Because that root ball, they're right on the boundary. So that root ball would extend probably 3 to 4 metres into the adjoining property. Have you considered that?
At the moment, those works have not been quoted by our company. The client is aware of the work that is involved. Obviously, it is their property. They know what's on the site.
Yeah.
They know the depth of the work that we will have to carry out. That's why they've had to compromise in other areas of the construction to, factor in those costs that they'll have to fork out later on.
Okay. All right. Questions?
Can I just ask, is this a relatively standard design that's being applied here?
This is a custom design to suit the lot, and it's what our client has asked us to do. We've had multiple amendments. I think we've gone back and forth with with council a few times to do a few amendments, but this is the latest one that they've come to terms with.
I'm just wondering what flexibility there may be for adjustments to potentially better align the second dwelling with some of the DCP standards, particularly relating to setbacks, the relationship with adjoining development, maximum height to ceilings, in terms of the flexibility of your design to be adjusted and modified to perhaps better fit the block rather than the block having to fit the design?
Okay, at the moment, I believe we proposed a 2.4 metre ceiling height, which is our minimum. In terms of reducing the height, I suppose we could consider a colour-bond roof, a flat roof, if the building height is a concern.
Is there a need for the dwelling to be elevated as opposed to some cut at the rear of the site?
Excavation, that's a factor of the build that would contribute significantly to the cost. So obviously the excavation, upturn beam, retaining wall, drainage associated, that's another significant cost that, you know, considering the client will have to do so much for the landscaping, it's not something that's feasible for them at the moment. To address the height, what we could really do is change the roof to a colour-bond flat roof, but in terms of excavation, that's not really an option for them at the moment.
And what about compliance with setback requirements?
To move it forward, at the moment, the main tree that they were concerned with was a phoenix palm, which we're trying to transplant. We're working with the site where there's trees at the front of the property as well, where we've proposed a transplanting, and we're trying to keep it as much to the rear as possible to enable the landscaping in front of the secondary dwelling.
Okay. All right.
Just was wondering, in relation to the existing site, you walk in, it's quite narrow, and then you step up those stairs. Does the application and how have you been asked to consider the landscaping of that portion of the site as part of this?
At the moment, we are not providing the landscaping for the development. That's something that our client will do externally after we've finished the build of the granny flat. But I can make a note to them that, you know, the landscaping and the steps is something they'll have to consider for access, obviously, to the secondary dwelling. Yep.
I suppose in that context, it doesn't actually have disabled access, does it? No.
Okay. James? All right. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
A decision will be taken later today and published on the council's website. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the Georges River Local Planning Panel meeting for the 12th of December 2019. I do thank you for your attendance. As I said, decisions will be made by the panel and published on the council's website shortly. Thank you.